Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of Video Clips. I hope everybody had a nice and enjoyable holiday and broke all the rules and didn't social distance and wore no masks and hugged your friends and family and had as normal a holiday as possible, because that's what humans are supposed to do. So remember a couple things here, just some announcements. We post on BitChute and Parler. And remember, I put out a forbidden newsletter on Mondays, starting again January 4th, and a forbidden video, which I will have posted this week, that I think you'll find interesting at WellnessForumHealth.com. We don't email those videos to you. You actually have to go to our website to watch them. We just still have autographed copies of COVID Operation here, and you can download an ebook from WellnessForumHealth.com since Amazon took the Kindle version off of their website. Also, let me remind people, school starts in, I think, 2 more weeks after this one. And so if you're thinking about a career change, either you're a health professional and you want to transition to doing more of the type of work that we do, or you're not a health professional and you want to become one, we have programs for both, and this is the time to talk about it if you're thinking of enrolling in some of our live classes that will start in a couple of weeks. So send me an email at pampopper@msn.com, and I'd be happy to set up a time to talk with you and send you some information and all that good stuff. I'm continuing to do conference calls once a week for those of you who want to mobilize and get your state on the map for having our landmark lawsuit filed where you live. New Mexico was filed last week, and we're looking for a third state. So get busy. Let's build a ground game in your state. This week, the conference call is on Wednesday, tomorrow at noon, and then Thursday, January 7th, and the 14th, every Thursday after that at noon Eastern time. It's free. I provide updates and guidance on what to do and how to do it and how to find attorneys and all that kind of good stuff that you need to know. So send me an email. We'll be happy to set you up. We have MAFA meetings, Make Americans Free Again meetings here on Thursday night. We go back to that next week on the whatever date that is, 7th of January, something like that. Yeah, 7th of January. And you can donate to the legal fund on the Make Americans Free Again website and order merchandise too. So I want to talk about information from the World Health Organization. I think it's really important to provide you with information that comes from the health authorities that the good people at the tech companies want you to listen to all the time. So this comes from the World Health Organization, and it has to do with PCR testing. So this came out at the beginning of December, and then I'll tell you some of what is behind this. But in any case, it says the purpose of the notice is to ensure that users of certain nucleic acid testing technologies are aware of certain aspects of the instructions for use for all products. And the problem that WHO, the World Health Organization, identifies is that it has received user feedback on an elevated risk for false SARS-CoV-2 results when testing specimens using PCR testing. And here's what the memorandum says. As with any diagnostic procedure, the positive and negative predictive values for the product in a given testing population are important to note. As the positivity rate for SARS-CoV-2 decreases, the positive predictive value decreases as well. This means that the probability that a person who has a positive test is truly infected with SARS-CoV-2 decreases as positivity rate decreases, irrespective of the assay specificity. Therefore, healthcare providers are encouraged to take into consideration testing results along with clinical signs and symptoms, confirmed status of any contacts, etc. Use of Rt Pcr reagents should read the instructional manual carefully to determine if manual adjustment of the PCR positivity threshold is necessary. In other words, you have heard, I think you've heard me talk about this, and certainly I wrote about it on the book, the number of cycles that are used to amplify the material that's taken in a sample. And what the WHO is suggesting is that perhaps that needs to be adjusted. Certainly after Mr. Fauci claimed over the summer that anything over 35 cycles just delivered a whole lot of false positives, that should have been done. But gosh, here we are, December of 2020, months later, and the WHO's just getting around to saying something about it. The design principle of RT-PCR means that for patients with high levels of circulating virus, relatively few cycles will be needed to detect virus, so the CT value will be low. Conversely, when specimens return a high CT value, it means that many cycles were required to detect virus. In some circumstances, the distinction between background noise and actual presence of the target virus is difficult to ascertain. What the World Health Organization is saying is that these PCR tests may not be as reliable as we thought they were. Thus, the IFU or manual will state how to interpret specimens at or near the limit for PCR positivity. In some cases, it'll state that the cutoff should be manually adjusted to ensure that specimens with high CT values are not incorrectly assigned SARS-CoV-2 detected due to background noise. So what this all comes down to is that the number of cycles, Mr. Fauci said this summer, 35 cycles or higher, you're going to get a bunch of quote unquote dead nucleotides. He didn't call it background noise, but he said it's really all false positives. And finally, the World Health Organization is acknowledging that. And they're encouraging everybody to read the manuals carefully and to take into consideration that the more cycles you run, the more likely you are to come up with background noise and false positives. And since the positivity rate, the cases are what are used to gin up all of these restrictions and that sort of thing, this becomes very, very important. Now, what I find really interesting about this is that very recently, right around the time that the WHO came out, World Health Organization came out with a statement, 22 researchers called for the retraction of an article published in January of this year, 2020, referred to as the Corman-Drosten report, in which researchers claim to have validated the use of PCR testing for COVID-19. The researchers listed 10 major flaws, and I'll just share a couple of them with you here, but I think you'll get the point. The results were based on theoretical sequences supplied by a laboratory in China because they were the only samples available. The researchers acknowledged this by stating in their paper, we aim to develop and deploy robust diagnostic methodology for use in public health laboratory settings without having virus material available. They also wrote, quote, the establishment and validation of a diagnostic workflow for 2019 Cove Screening and specific confirmation designed in the absence of available virus isolates or original patient specimens. Design and validation were enabled by the close genetic relatedness to the 2003 SARS-CoV and aided by the use of synthetic nucleic acid technology. Well, what they did was they didn't have any viral material available, so they just used something close, which was the SARS-CoV from 2003. Well, you really can't develop a valid test without the viral material, and the use of something closely related is really not a proper substitute. The test cannot discriminate between whole virus and viral fragments, and that's what the World Health Organization was talking about, is how much do you have to amplify this stuff to come up with something? The more amps, the more amplifications, the more likely you are to be dealing with what Mr. Fauci reported as background noise. The failure to establish a CT value at which samples are considered positive and negative. And then the test design in the paper, the Corman-Drosten paper is vague. Nothing is standardized, no standard operating procedures. And then this is very important. Conflicts of interest were not disclosed for the authors. They were identified for 4 of them. 2 of the authors served on the editorial board for the journal in which the paper was published. And Corman and Drosten themselves did not identify or mention that they were affiliated with a laboratory involved in PCR testing. And the PCR tests, by the way, started being distributed right even before the papers were this paper was published. And talk about peer review, it spent 24 hours before it was peer reviewed. And before it even appeared in the journal, the World Health Organization issued instructions to start using the test. So all in all, I mean, to say that this was sloppy and a ridiculous way to go about things is an understatement, particularly in view of the amazing and profound way in which this has affected so many people. And at this point in time, after all of this damage and destruction, for the World Health Organization to say, well, maybe we ought to be thinking about this a little bit differently, is just beyond imagination to me. But this gives you an idea. This paper published in January of 2020, before any of the hysteria started, certainly planned to create some of the hysteria that's contemplated in the way that this was all done. So anyway, that's it for today. Hopefully this gives you some additional information why I'm just so furious about all of this. I mean, if I had engaged in something like this, can you imagine the name calling, or you know, if normal everyday people had engaged in this type of deception? Hard to know what the punishment would be like, but I don't think it would be mild. All right. Okay, that's it for now. As usual, I'll pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy learning more about this very important issue we're dealing with today, and I'll be back to you tomorrow with more news.